You have jeans on and we're on Zoom. You are
Yeah,
insane.
she told me she wasn't
You're
even
lucky
gonna
I have any pants on at all. The only reason I do is to protect my chair.
That's a reel right there.
You're
getting that one right there.
okay.
What?
Okay.
Oh, I forgot to
You
click out of this because you're recording me right now. Oh, yeah, that's right.
recording already?
I record from
You
the
get
beginning.
my bloopers already. She does this on
Sometimes
purpose because then I say stuff at the beginning
says-
and she makes it into a reel or something
Troy says something.
because she thinks it's funny.
It is funny. Welcome to Pros Talking Pros. This is Stacy, the mediocre, Troy the illustrious, and we have my best friend ever in the whole wide world joining us today, who is an LAMFT. Did I say that right? Mm-hmm. She is a marriage and family therapist. Marriage and family, or is it marriage family?
Marriage and family.
Marriage and family. So there's a conjunction there. So She is coming because we are going to talk about Troy. What are we going to talk about? Dun, dun, dun.
We're going to talk about trauma and how you're doing it wrong in fiction.
There you go.
Okay.
Or doing it
right. Or doing it right. We'll put a positive spin on it from time to time.
Maybe.
But I'll just say at the beginning, when you brought up this topic, my main thing is that writers are very bad, notoriously, at research. Full stop. They just don't understand that certain things, the difference between fiction and real life is that we have to make fiction believable, which means you have to actually know enough about the facts to make it so that someone actually believes that you know what you're talking about, that this could actually be real, even when you do have to fictionalize certain details. So writers are really bad, notoriously, especially new writers, are bad at research, horrible at it. So that's why people tell you to write what you know, is because you don't know some things and you're faking it. Anyway.
So we're gonna talk about that. Let's talk about that. But let me first introduce us a little bit, based for those of you who have not joined us before. Troy and we do this nice little podcast to kind of talk about. You get to be the fly on the wall when he and I get to have philosophical discussions about writing or the business. And today I have a feeling that he and I might butt heads a little bit more than usual. I don't know. I'm predicting. We'll see. We'll see. But okay, so just to unpack a little bit about what you said about not doing research, I will say that this is kind of like what I've noticed in general, and this is like why I'm bringing my best friend in here, because she's not allowed to therapy me, by the way, full disclosure, but there are many times where she and I will discuss things in the industry and in the world, and world issues and things like that, and she will all the things. We very, very much are a gossip. We're a couple of gossips, but we like to sit in the car and really kind of bang this stuff out. And she will bring in a lot of her knowledge and her expertise about therapy and trauma, and kind of like the over diagnosis of the world right now, and the way that we kind of like, there's fads in the world right now where people say, well, I have ADHD, or I have the autism, or I'm on the spectrum, or whatever. And they really never are diagnosed with those things, or they're using those as identities, which is something that I know is a pet peeve of yours. But one of the things that this translates into is books in a lot of ways. People will bring this stuff into books. And that's why I think that I wanted to have Jeannie's head here, is because one, she can kind of keep us on straight as far as like making sure that we understand that it's not appropriate to throw out those terms, right? Just to throw them out.
Yeah.
We should research.
Yeah.
So we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the trope of trauma. Troy, you brought up a couple of days ago when we were talking about this, and we got all excited because this is a fun topic. You brought up that actually conflict has to exist. So trauma is something that a lot of times people bring in to create that character arc and have that journey that the character is going on through that plot, right? And we want to bring in the trauma because a lot of times people will use that as a fallback And you brought up the fact that conflict has to exist. And I agree with that. But do you find that do you find that like using trauma as a crutch or as like kind of a fallback is kind of like an overused thing?
Yeah. So uh, for just a minute, I'll just say that tropes exist because tropes work.
Mm-hmm.
That's why people keep using them. They use the hard-boiled detective who's drunk, who's lost his wife and his family because he's too dedicated to his job, because that works. No matter how many times you write it, there's always a reader who says, "Give me more of that." Right? Romance tropes is one of the biggest ones, right? But I think that what happens sometimes is people become so dependent upon the tropes that they don't break out and create something original, right? They don't create that depth of character and that originality. And so I think they rely on trauma as a crutch, because one of the things that often happens in fiction is, this is often the pattern. Your character comes into a situation or a story or a book or whatever with a misbelief, something that they believe that is not true. Well, the nature of writers and of humanity is to blame that misbelief on some kind of past trauma from their childhood or from their teen years or whatever. And they're trying to heal themselves. But the truth is, we all have those little misbeliefs that happen as a result of something that happened last week.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be something traumatic. It can be just something that you were taught or that you read on the internet and you believed, even though it wasn't true, or whatever little thing like that. But it's easier to blame it on trauma because it's lazy. It's a lazy approach to
Mm.
that trope of saying, why does this person have this disbelief? Well, because they had trauma in their childhood, because we all have some kind of trauma from our childhood. And we're like looking back on that as some kind of a way of a reason for the things that we do now. And the truth is, in my mind, is you reach a certain age and you either need to have done some therapy and worked through those things, right? Or it's still your fault. At some point, you become an adult and you're responsible for your own actions. And whatever your parents did to you when you're six isn't you know what I mean? Anyway, sorry. But so I think that people use that as a um, easy way out when they're plotting or figuring something out. They go, "This there has to be a reason for this somewhere." So it's trauma
Trauma.
somewhere in their past.
So, Jeannie, what is
You know.
trauma then? Is there a definition like that people, is there like an actual like line that you guys work
Well,
in?
I think I would ask you what you feel like trauma is. Like what do you think, what do you define as trauma, Troy? Like what do you see as trauma?
So, I mean, the common ones are childhood abuse, childhood neglect, um, some kind of accident, some kind of family death, something that's a major life disruption to what we would consider a normal childhood or a normal life. Um,
It has to be like a big T trauma. So what
well,
if
it
so
doesn't
what if
have to be, but I think that's what people lean towards.
so what if I'm raised by parents who love me and they stay married and they're nurturing and pretty much do everything right. And yet, for some reason, I have anxiety, right? And so throughout my growing up, friendships are hard, relationships are hard. It's difficult for me. And as I'm growing up, then and these friends are coming and going out of my life and things are happening, it's shaping how I'm showing up in my relationships as an adult, right? And you said something really important. We have a
Hmm.
responsibility to heal ourselves, to recognize when something is affecting how we're showing up and then fix it, right? So if I'm now in this book or in this story, right, and I have a relationship and I want to show up better, and I am exploring through the story why I'm not showing up well in my relationships, and part of that exploration is going back to this experience growing up with this anxiety and how it affected my relationships and things that I did or didn't do because of it, right? Would that would you consider that a form of trauma, or would you just call that life experience? Like, are we kind of mincing words here? Because for me, that's that there's some trauma in that. There's some damage, some wound, right? There's a wound that we need to heal, which is really what when we think of like feel like it's like trauma surgery, right? Like going into trauma surgery, it's because there's been
Hmm.
a traumatic wound, something has happened, right? And so I think we can look at that, we can kind of see that word differently for different reasons, but maybe what the function of the author is in telling the story, right? Is I don't know,
Well,
So is
what do
trauma,
you
so is
think?
trauma just kind of a generic term then that we're just throwing on everything that could be just a life experience that could give someone some distress in some way or create that wound? Is that what that is then? And then in that case, if that's the case, then pretty much anything or any lie that a character is telling themselves that they're trying to overcome throughout that story could be considered trauma based on their, whether it be a big T or a little T, right?
Maybe. I mean, there's some things I think that maybe aren't like we're self wounding, right? We are and so I don't know that we want to like overgeneralize, but I think also for the purposes of like thinking about like a character arc, even like in our personal lives, like our own character arc, right? We have to face those things that have happened to us. And so we might be saying the same thing, Troy, like as what you're talking about. It's like at some point you have to become responsible for that. We're
hmm
probably saying the same thing, just maybe like looking at it in a different
A
lens.
different lens. Yeah.
But
well, I think it's
that
what
is
we're.
the case.
I think
Mhm.
what we're looking at maybe a little bit differently is the trigger for the trauma.
Mm.
Like
Oh,
typically, I think of trauma as something that's caused by an event. Now, that event could be something that's small or even a repetitive event. My mom made me walk down the dark alleyway to put the bank deposit from her small business in the bank every night. So I am terrified of enclosed dark spaces, especially dark alleyways, because I had to
yeah.
repeatedly
Mhm.
go into a scary situation and maybe nothing happened
Mhm.
in that situation, but I felt like
Mhm.
something was going to happen. I felt like there were monsters in there, whatever. And that feeling came from some kind of experience, even if it wasn't what you would normally consider to be trauma.
Right.
As far as like a so I had a motorcycle accident in 2000. I would consider that a trauma. Like it
Mhm.
was physically, mentally, spiritually, everything. It hit all the notes, right? You're laying on the side of the road going, I could have died today.
Yeah.
Now what do I do with the rest of my life? You know, that's trauma. That's a big T trauma. But I think that kid that's scared of the alleyway is just as traumatic, or the kid that's
Mhm.
struggles with relationships is usually because they had friendships or whatever in school that for whatever reasons were difficult, and they had anxiety in that area. And that builds up over time to the point where now I'm 18 and I have a girlfriend and I can't maintain that relationship because I still have anxiety about relationships. But it doesn't necessarily mean one person hurt you at age 3. But
Right.
Right.
So this is where I would like come full circle with this and say, oftentimes we think of trauma with this big T, right? But as a therapist, I don't
Mhm,
necessarily think of it as big T, little T, because it's everybody's just lived experience, right? And I think when Stacey and I first started talking about this, we were talking about how it feels like a lot of the books that she's been getting, or like stories that are kind of coming out by new authors right now, like seem to be held in this really heavy trauma. Like the character has to have
Mhm.
this really
mhm.
heavy trauma, and we're forgetting.
Sorry. Resume. We're forgetting.
And we're forgetting that there's just lived experiences that also can cause this sort of traumatic wound, right? So when I was thinking about this,
Mhm,
and I was kind of talking to different people about it over the past week, somebody brought up Joy from Inside Out,
Oh yeah,
because
yeah,
Joy's character
mhm,
Inside Out, like she has to go through this massive character arc,
yeah.
right?
Right.
But it's just founded in that like she was coming from this place of being very naive, and that there was just this one way to live life, and had to accept that there were these other things, that sadness was necessary, right? Anger was necessary. And so she had to kind of come through this, but there didn't necessarily have to be like this big triggering event that brought her to that.
mhm,
The
Mm.
writers were able to tell her story just through the lens of her growing, right? And maybe that's what, and I
Mhm.
want to jump ahead in what
Yeah.
we're
No, no,
talking
that's
about today, but
perfect.
I feel like that might be one of the things that maybe Stacey was
Yeah, that's the where I'm
originally
going.
mhm,
talking about, kind of missing, is that
Mhm.
we're not doing as good at telling stories where it's just about the growth of the character without a huge trigger of like, I was kidnapped when I was 5 and forced to become an assassin, and then I was
that
like
type of
trying
thing.
to right my wrongs.
Yeah, and
Have you
especially
read A Prayer for Owen Meany?
no, what is that?
Oh, it's a John Irving book that is one of my favorite books of all time.
What's it called?
Um, A Prayer for Owen Meany.
Owen
And it
Meany.
is a perfect
Bye.
example of what you're talking about, because Owen Meany, really, he has this very interesting upbringing, not to spoil it for anybody, but then everything in his life builds up to this one event. And the reason he is able to react the way that he is in that event and save lives is because of his past and all this life that he's lived up to that point. And it's a super fascinating book because it's not told from his point of view. It's told from his friend's point of view. And but it's very good that way, in that there's not a major trauma in his life. There is just this whole life experience that he has with his parents, who are very odd people, and all these other things. And he ends up, just anyway, but it's just a perfect example of that. There's not a big trauma. There's not a big trauma that just triggers the whole thing. It's just
No,
everything
yeah.
about it is a life.
So
But yeah.
basically, yeah, it's what's it about? That's what it says. Tragic accident involving a foul ball leads an eccentric boy to believe he's an instrument in God's hand, shaping a lifelong spiritual journey. And Stephen King gave a great review of it. So apparently it's by John Irving, if you guys want to read that. But one of the things
Yep.
that I wanted to point out that you guys are kind of hitting on is that, like, very much this is kind of where I was coming from, where I think a lot of times characters want to point to someone else as that person caused me to have
Yes.
problem, when in fact it's really more about self-awareness. It's about self-discovery. It's about understanding our own flaws and maybe exploiting those, or figuring out what's maybe wrong with our way of thinking. It's really about, like you said, relationships that fail, and then relationships that thrive, that things that like actually happen in real life, where the majority of us kind of just exist, and there is conflict in that. So
Mhm.
that, like,
Absolutely.
and like you said, conflict is a huge driver of these character arcs, and it's the thing that your readers will connect to. Jeannie is amazing. She reads more than I do, guys, and that's really saying something. She reads so much. You read a lot, and your daughter reads, I think, even more than both of us combined. Like,
For sure.
amazingly like fast reader. Well, one of the things that Jeannie does is she jumps around in genres a lot. Like, she loves all different kinds of genres, and it is so amazing to me how she'll pick up a book and she'll just read right into these character arcs. And that's what drives her through the story. Is she always talks about, specifically, her and her daughter both, when they talk to me about books they like, they're talking about the characters and what they find fascinating about these
Mhm.
characters. It's never about the plot, guys. It's never about like, oh, this person did this and this and this and this and this because this is going on in the world. It's more about, like, this character learned this and this and this and this and this because they were like having to go through this really hard thing.
There has to be a good story though, right?
Right.
One of the authors that we read,
Yes.
Catherine Stedman, and she writes these books that, oh man, her characters are so good because it's like your best friend is going through this story, and the whole time you're like, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Please don't. The other thing you're about to do, I just need you to not do that. And she does it anyway, because it's exactly what you would do if you were her in the book. And
Mhm.
the story is so good, but it's the character's so relatable, because they're just, it's like like she's managed to tap into like the every person, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is,
Mhm.
if this was you and me and we were on this trip and we found this bag, we would probably look in it. And when we looked in the bag and we found the stuff, we'd probably be like, oh, how do we hide this and get it back into the country? And how do we, right? Like, you'd be like, how do we probably do this?
How do we not
right?
get avoided?
Right?
How do we not get
How do
caught
we
or killed?
the sewer systems, and
Yeah.
whose bag was this originally that might come after us looking for it? We don't know, but
We
we're
don't
not
know.
going to worry about that. It's just, and so I think when we're talking about like what drives the character arc for, when Stacy's talking about, when Muriel and I are talking about books, it is often about how relatable the character is, and how it's really about the arc. Like their learning experience is so relatable. Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, when they came through that, there's, I mean, the type of trope that could be used is so varied, but the ability to bring the connection. And so if you're only reading stories where people have been, you know, like I also read a lot of like, you know, Navy SEALs or, you know, former military saving the world from certain destruction in every book. But their stories are always so
different,
so tragic. Like, I mean, everybody's dead. There's, you know, I killed half of them on accident because of I led bad guys to them, and I have to live with my life choices killed everybody. But that's not, a lot of us don't relate to that.
Yeah.
Like a lot of us haven't been in
Well,
that, right?
yeah.
So,
What's interesting is,
so it's still fun,
there,
but it's not, you're not connecting in the same way.
right, and what's interesting is people connect to different characters. So some people have experienced stuff like that. So military guys are like, oh, but what I find a lot with authors is they don't understand in genre fiction, 70% of your readers are female. Even if you're on average, even if you're writing dark noir thrillers and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, because women are who reads those books, right? So I tell people, you know, they sprinkle in a little bit of romance. Why do they do that? Well, because first of all, the women like it, and so do the guys. The guys just won't admit it. So, you know, but I think one of the things we need to talk about is that what we're talking about in conflict in this case is the internal conflict and how that impacts the external conflict. Why does that lady react that way when she finds that bag? Well, because her personality tells her that bag's there. It's in it. Let me go look and see.
Check it out.
Where some people would be like, look at that bag over there on the sidewalk. I'm not going anywhere near that. In fact, I think I'm going to call somebody. You know what I mean? Like, that's because people are different in the way they react, but we can all relate to it because we all have that friend. Well, and I'm that friend for some people that just my wrist window is like this wide, and so you're like,
you and I are both that friend. Yeah.
like, let's go do
Let's
that.
go
And I'm
see
like,
that.
all right, is it dangerous? I don't know yet. Maybe let's go find out. You know, so I mean, I think there's that aspect of things too, is that and there's people that want to relate to that. Like, I want to be the person that runs in when I see an accident. I am that person. But, you know, other people are like, I want to be that person that runs in when I see an accident and I try to save the day. But they know in reality, if I see an accident on the freeway, I'm skirting to the other lane. I'm calling the cops. I'm going as fast as I can to get away from that thing that's happened.
We just
You
went and
know,
saw a comic, Zoltan, remember? And he talked about the guy in the wheelchair who fell out of the wheelchair, and he was like, I didn't go over there and help him. Like, I hope someone comes and helps him.
There was already people.
yeah.
There was already people. But yeah.
I think something you said is so interesting because yeah, my husband and I, we both really like, is it okay if I say authors' names?
Yeah.
We really like Brad Thor, right? So Brad Thor,
Yeah.
I don't even know how many Scott Horvath books at this point, right? Like he's saved the world more times. But the thing that we love about it is Derek likes it because it appeals to like that action part, and he's military and he likes hearing about all the sometimes I'm like, we could talk less about what kind of guns we're using. But I like it because there's this softer side of Scott Horvath, right? Like there's this part of him that you're like, he's going to save the world and he's going to protect us. And I want to believe somebody like that's out there. But also there's this really beautiful story about like his character, right? So I think it comes to both. What I think that we really love about that, like in any of these books that Derek and I both read, because he reads a lot too, and he'll listen to like all the same genres that I do. Like he will listen on Audible. So he'll listen to books that I've read, that my daughter's read, like all genre hopping. And I think that we have to find the thing that we connect to. So if the author's doing a good job of the backstory, is doing a good job of it, like this traumatic thing happened or not, but this is my backstory and this is how I got here and you're going to connect with me, then it doesn't really matter if you're male, female. I'm 50, my daughter's 18, right? Like husband's young. And there's all these, but we can all connect.
This just turned into confessions of a cougar. But all right, go ahead. Anyway.
But we all can connect on some level, or we can all not. And that's what's interesting is like sometimes will get into a book. Also, like there's not very many books that I don't finish, but I just recently had downloaded one on Audible, and the author tried to fit every imaginable trope in the first 2 chapters,
Ew.
right? Like she's pulling out,
Oof.
like just in the
Ouch.
introduction of the characters, like there was so much trauma. Like all of these people have all these really traumatic backstories and setting up all these different tropes. And I was like, we're only 20 pages into this book. I don't even know, I can't keep track of where it's going. And then I asked my daughter if she would listen to it, and she turned it on, and she didn't even make it as far as I did. And she was like, that was
Hmm.
awful to listen to. And that I think that is part of what Stacy was talking about. We were talking about why are we using this? It's the overuse or the lack of connection, right? Because what we're talking about with being able to connect with these characters on all these different levels and where they're coming from, whether it's trauma that we can't relate to, but we can at least understand the character that's being built, or
Hmm.
we can't, right? Like this is crazy. Like this author's going too hard, too far. And they're using terms that they shouldn't be using. They're using diagnosis that they
Oh
shouldn't
yeah.
be,
Hmm.
interesting when an author chooses to throw out a diagnosis. That's always a little bit that is a sketchy area, because sometimes
Oh.
right, it's better if they hint to a diagnosis without naming it, because that way it's leaving something to the reader to kind of
Or just talk about the
infer, but
symptoms.
also,
If you
yeah,
just talk about
Well.
symptoms or personality traits or behaviors, you and avoid that
naming.
the psychobabble, which is like what I
Hmm.
was gonna talk about next. Is like, yeah, avoiding that psychobabble, because that's the thing I think that is the trend right now. And that's the thing that really irks you. It gets on my craw, because people will throw out these terms and they don't really one understand that the diagnosis process behind it. Okay, well, my best friend here,
So.
I just asked permission. She has ADHD, and one of the things that's it's not an identity for her. It's the way she is. But one of the things that people have to understand about her diagnosis is that she has had symptoms of this since she was very, very young. This is something that's been built into her entire life. It is something that she has actually had to deal with her entire life. And people who come to my age, one of the things that I was noticing I was having a lot of symptoms when I came into menopause, and I was wondering, because a lot of things were coming into like my reels and stuff, and I asked her, I said, do I have ADHD? Everyone says that I have ADHD. And she's like, it's not an onset. You don't get it as an onset. This is something that
Yeah,
you're
it's
born
not
with.
Well,
contagious.
let's
Yeah.
talk about where it comes from. Let's
Yeah.
talk
Let's
about
talk
the
about that.
symptoms and when they start and
Yeah.
how. I mean, like there's more to
There's most
diagnosing.
to diagnosis. There's more to diagnosis. And people like, they'll throw out this, well, my husband's a narcissist. Well, is he really? Or is he just a little selfish? Or does he have some personality traits that are just a little bit on the extreme side? Or, you know what I mean? Or is he just a dick? Like,
And
I
we
mean,
hear that with gaslighting.
Well.
There's phrases that people like to use
yeah,
because someone cannot have empathy for you. Somebody can treat you really horribly. They can not be gaslighting you, right? Like gaslighting
Hmm.
is a very real thing. Like PTSD is
a
extreme.
really
Like
thing. Yeah.
yes, this comes from
Yeah,
extreme
PTSD is a
trauma.
real
We
thing.
shouldn't say I have PTSD from having a cold shower, which is something that people say. Well, that is not actually
Oh.
okay for you to
Yeah.
say, right?
So
Well,
It's
it's
not
not
okay.
okay.
also, let me just throw this out here as far as it's related to fiction. One of the things that we say in fiction all the time is to show, don't tell.
Right.
Yes.
And one of the reasons is this very reason.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay, I want you to relate to that character because maybe you've had similar trauma, or maybe you know someone who has,
Or
or
maybe you
maybe whatever.
behave this way a little bit.
Maybe you behave, yeah, maybe you behave this way a little bit,
Inkle.
you know, all that kind of stuff. Because I understand, that people go undiagnosed with ADHD for
Oh
years,
yeah.
especially of our
Mhm.
generation, because there's like,
They wanna-
oh, you're just hyper and you don't ever pay attention to anything. And I'm like, yeah, I can't do that. But anyway, but you know what I mean? Like there was just, but there wasn't like a formal diagnosis. I mean, it just didn't happen a lot of times. Okay, that's one thing, but that still gives you no excuse as a writer to say, this person has ADHD,
If they just are
because
easily distracted.
because first of all, you're creating a stereotype and telling
Mhm.
us about someone instead of showing us their behavior.
Exactly.
So like Monk, was Monk obsessive compulsive? the show Monk?
Well, you
Was
never
that
even,
guy obsessive
yeah, you don't
compulsive?
even really get his diagnosis. You just see it. You just see
Yeah.
personality.
Did anybody ever say in that
Mm-mm.
show, "Oh, he's obsessive compulsive"? Fans of the show said he's OCD, like real, like the
Mhm.
real deal, OCD, germaphobe, all the kind of things, right?
Everybody in the show just called
But
him crazy.
nobody in the show said that.
Nope.
Everybody in the show was just annoyed with him for
Yeah.
his little very
Or-
particular things that he did, and so we just saw it through being shown. So the same thing in any other type of fiction. Your job as the author is to show us and let us draw our own conclusions, because different people are going to draw different conclusions. Exactly what you're talking about. Three different people, vastly different ages, different genders, enjoying the same character in a book. Why? Because you all relate to him in a different way. If we sat you each down separately in a room and said, "Why do you relate to this character?" we get three different answers, which means
Yeah.
the author has done a very good job.
Right.
It also relates to the fact that everyone is the hero of their own story. So we're the hero of our own story. So we like to believe that we would be the hero in this story. So when we tell stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things and we just show the things that they do, then that makes it relatable to way more people than if you say, this character has ADHD, and somebody goes, "I'm not reading a book about a character with ADHD,"
Mhm.
and sets it
Mhm.
aside. However, they'll read a book about somebody with ADHD if you just don't say it.
That's how
Yeah.
And I think sometimes what's interesting is we just my daughter and I both just finished a book where um we both came out of it like I hope I would show up like this side character, like this other person in the book showed up for our,
Mhm.
and we picked different people. Like we weren't even like, she was like, I really love the way this person showed up, and I really like the way this person showed up. And that, I think, really good authors, like people who are telling a really good story, like it's woven in. And like the reason that I related to this one character is because this particular character just had so much empathy and compassion, and just the ability to kind of gut feel what the main character needed without her asking. And like, "God, I can relate to that." That's
Mhm.
something that I feel like um so I think maybe it's just helping new authors understand that they don't have what exactly what you just said, the show don't tell, even when it comes to trauma and the types of things that they're trying to pull into their character, the backstory, or maybe the struggles with depression or anxiety or things that they're trying to bring in. It's maybe that new authors, people that are coming into this and want to tell this story, and they're inundated with social media and reels and all these things that are using these diagnosis incorrectly, or kind of stereotyping and or overgeneralizing things, need to go back to what you were saying originally, get back to the basics of research and character development. You know,
Mhm.
watch Stacy's video. You may have one too on how we develop a character in a way that shows the reader the experience of the character without having to explicitly like put it on a platter and say, here's this
Here's this label.
Mhm.
label that I'm going to put on there. And I
Yeah.
copied this information. I Googled the DSM
I
and
went
I
to the
found this
Wikipedia.
information. But rather,
Yeah.
I've
Oh,
learned,
the Wikipedia.
yeah, but if
Oh,
I want to bring, but if I want to bring a diagnosis into a character, then what I'm going to do maybe is talk to a couple of people that have experienced that. Maybe I'm going to
yes.
time with someone who has ADHD and then say, what's it like to have autism and ADHD? And how does that affect your life? And let me see how you show up in life before I decide to give these traits to a character so that I can make sure that I'm getting it right. But then I'm not going to have to
Right.
tell the audience that this is the diagnosis, because they're just going to experience it through the eyes of the character.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
I'm gonna plug a book
Well,
real quick just before you jump in here, Trey.
yep.
I'm gonna plug in story. This, what is it? This, hold on. I just lost it because I interrupted you. See what happens? Story Genius, by Lisa.
Story Genius by Lisa Cron.
I love
Yes.
her. This would help you research your character, because what it'll do is it'll teach you to go into that backstory, know where to start your story, first of all, also, and secondly, and thirdly, and awful for forever and more, because that's really actually the most important part. But really understanding where the backstory begins and ends, and where the story begins. And when you're doing that backstory development, that's where you can do your research about the motivations of a character so that you can understand why they do things. That's how you build in those character traits. You build them in as the story is progressing. You don't have to give this big info dump about, well, this character is used to doing this and this and this and this. You're doing it in the story as it progresses.
Yeah, please no info dumps about the research that you've done when you do research. Because it's the other mistake that authors make is they do research and then they like to dump that history right into the middle of the book. We know we have an author we work with that does that, right? And just dumps that information in the book with a footnote at the end of the chapter. It's fiction, people. Don't do that. Okay, just don't do it. Because first of all, we don't want to read it. But also, it just takes people out of the story. So I write about serial killers. I'm going to plug a book too. It's called The Mask of Sanity.
Okay.
And it's actually part of the required reading for the behavioral sciences unit in the FBI still. It was originally written in 1943, revised in 1963. And it's amazing. And the reason it's amazing is because this guy that's writing it goes through the characteristics, some of the characteristics of like serial killers and criminals and things like that. And then at the end of the book, he gives fictional examples. You know, in some cases, they're based on real people. And don't read this at night before you go to bed because it will freak you out because you're going to be like,
yeah,
I know somebody like that.
Yeah. Oh.
Because the truth is, like, I like to write cop thrillers where the cop and the criminal are both sociopaths. They've just chosen different sides of the law because it's true. Why don't police officers' family lives last, and why do they fall apart, and why do they become obsessive with their job, and all that kind of stuff? Because they actually have sociopathic tendencies. They just chose to be a cop. This guy has sociopathic tendencies. He chose to rob banks, and most of those criminals are really good at it, so they get away with it for years. They make a career out of being a criminal and never spend any time in prison. It's amazing,
They could
right?
be the
And
best
so,
of friends.
in my book that I'm writing right now, that's the third in the Max Boucher series, the cop and the criminal become friends. He doesn't know the guy's the bad guy. This guy knows he's a cop, but doesn't know he's there investigating he's a former cop PI.
That's good.
And they become friends. And at the end, the cop has to make a choice.
Yeah.
This is his friend.
Oh,
but this friend has killed a whole shit ton of people.
That trope has actually been used. That's Fast and the Furious.
Oh. Was that Fast and the Furious 10 because there was so much more
No.
story to tell?
No.
Is that
Troy, it was the first one. The very first one.
I know the first one. I know the story. This is not that story. Ah. Oh, it's terrible.
It's funny.
That was Undercover. That's a whole different thing. That's a whole different trope.
Hey,
The undercover that falls in love, then turns sides. One of them turns sides. Doesn't matter which one. That's another trope.
They fall in love.
They fall in love.
The truth is, you can use that if you write it well. You can use that trope over and over again. It's like Kurt Vonnegut's Shape of Stories. Yeah. Tell the Cinderella story again. Girl just having a bad day, and things just get worse. Fairy godmother comes along, gives her transportation, clothes, friends, all that kind of stuff. Then, the height of happiness, she's dancing with the prince, and then everything goes downhill. Dong, 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 dong. There's steps down there because it takes time for the clock to chime midnight. And then she runs away, leaves the glass slipper. Ooh, everything is. Did she go all the way down to what she was before again? No, of course not. She had this wonderful experience with the prince, but she's still back in the same thing with her stepsisters. Guy comes around with the glass slipper, shoves it on her foot fits. Now she lives with the prince happily ever after, out of this world, infinity happiness.
Roy, you just ruined that story for so many people. There's so many people that were like, I was gonna read that. And now you just ruined it.
Cinderella's been out for a while. If I spoiled Cinderella for you, it's been out for a while. Go read it. Watch the 15 adaptations and the ones on stage too. Your kid probably was in a play about Cinderella at some point in elementary school. Go watch it. Pay better attention. Oh, anyway.
Okay. Well, now that we've done that, we had to get a rant out of you.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I'm calm now. I'm good.
Sure you are.
There's trauma in my past that causes this. Anyway.
You may want to explore your Cinderella trigger.
Yeah, you should probably explore that, Trey. She can't therapy you. It's not ethical.
Forced to do chores as a child.
She just met me.
Were you forced to do chores as a child? Were you forced to pull the cinders out of the fireplace or the peas?
No, I was forced to do chores. Of course I was.
Because your parents loved you.
My mom was a single mom, and so there was only two of us, my brother and I and her. Somebody had to wash the dishes. And somebody had to do mechanical things, and my brother couldn't tell one end of a screwdriver from the other. Still can't.
On the trauma.
Here we are.
There we are.
There we are.
There's the connection to Cinderella.
Yeah, it's a long-term wound. There were repeated wounds over and over. Anyway.
Do you want to lay down? I can get her a notepad. Like, we can have a moment.
Yeah. We can just have a little analysis here. Why not? What do you think of your mother?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Oh, this is funny.
Anyway.
So,
sorry.
okay,
No, it is fun, but it does make our point, though. It makes our point.
So then my question is then what is the responsibility of authors then when it comes to portraying mental health? Like, do we have a responsibility, or is this something that we should, like, I don't think, and I feel like as an editor, when I get a story that they're hitting these points, it's my responsibility to point that out. But as an author, coming to a freelance editor, you can choose to keep that stuff in there or not. My whole thing though is that if you're paying a professional and the professional gives you the advice of doing, like, taking this stance with the way that you show, don't tell, and you create this character arc that's going to have these character traits, but not necessarily point these fingers and create the label. I feel like that there's a responsibility on the author to make sure that they're fleshing out a story in the right way.
Yes.
Right?
Well, I would say that for sure. Okay. So the responsibility of the author is really to the reader.
Right.
And so let me just, while we're talking about that and the role of human editors in this age where people are talking about AI editors, big discussion I just had today, right? The thing that AI editors can't do, I mean, they can correct your grammar and punctuation, stuff like that, but they don't know and understand life experiences and those feelings. So you might be able to get an AI to describe the traits of someone with ADHD, right? You might. But how accurate is that going to be down to the daily operations and daily living of that?
Or
it's
the feeling.
Not.
Or the feeling.
Or the feelings internally of that
right.
person who is experiencing that.
Exactly.
Because a lot of times what people don't understand is I have been super frustrated with myself at many times in my life because there are things that, like, if I don't establish a routine for myself, I literally have a spot for my keys in every house that I've ever been in. And if you move my keys 2 feet, I cannot find them.
Oh my gosh. You shouldn't have said that to me.
I'm probably not. But anyway, I'm probably in trouble now. But
so
you know what I mean?
I don't want to promote,
so they don't understand
a product, but that's why we have AirTag.
Oh, my keys are not here on my desk because that's not where they belong, but they do have an AirTag. I can locate them with my phone right now. Why? And why do I put those on my keys and my girlfriend Holly does not have those on her keys? Because she doesn't have my problem, right? But like, part of what people don't understand is your character will become very frustrated with themselves. They don't necessarily want to be this way.
And AI doesn't.
They want to be normal.
Yeah.
But it is literally not possible. Like, it is, I have tried every trick in the book. The way I remember where my keys is I put them in the same place where they belong every time. And if I don't, I know that I better give myself an extra half hour before I leave the house. Except now I have AirTags, so, then I can actually find them. Technology, better living through technology.
With Jeannie, where she will be like, I don't want to be this way.
And it's true. It's true. So that needs to come out in
It's
your
the parts that
character.
are quirky and
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And it's also the manifestation is different in
In
Everybody.
everyone.
people, right? You
Mhm.
line up 10 people with ADHD that were diagnosed roughly at the same point in their life, and their experiences and how it manifests is going to be different. The way the medications affect them is going to be different.
Mhm.
There's so many things. And
Mhm.
so no matter how intelligent AI gets, I wonder if it will ever actually be able to be helpful in that way that you could, because the human experience can be replicated, right? My experience can be replicated by you. Your experience can't be replicated by Stacy. Like we all have our own experience. And even if we have people that have essentially grown up, you line up people, same religion, same gender,
Same family life.
same age group,
Yeah.
roughly the same
Mhm.
they're all going to have had a completely different experience, and they're going to show up differently based on those experiences. They're like if there's a neurodivergence, or you have depression or anxiety among some of them, that's going to affect things huge. It's all going to show up differently, and the manifestation of it's going to be different. And so that's something that AI, I think, will never be able to
Never
do,
be able to
is
do.
replicate that
Mhm.
human experience of anything, right? So whether it is having a diagnosable disorder, or it's having something that's happened in your past, right? The loss of a parent, whatever it is, it's going to be different for everyone, right? Like I
Mhm.
lost my father a couple of years ago. My experience losing my dad, like I was a daddy's girl, right? Like my experience of losing my dad could be vastly different than someone I'm talking to just casually anywhere that's also lost their dad, and maybe they had a really difficult relationship with their father. Like it's not the
Mhm.
same, right? Like our grief is different. So even the same traumatic experiences or difficult things that we overcome are still very human specific, right?
Right.
They're very person.
Right.
And so to go to
Well,
Stacey's question, I think the author has a responsibility to do research,
Right.
to if you're interested in writing a book about a certain type of character, try to find people in your sphere that may know somebody or have experience or whatever, so that you can learn about it. And then
mhm.
also just do some learning, find some basic information, right? You want to learn about trauma and the way it manifests, the body keeps the score, right? Like it's a great book that's going to teach you about trauma
Right.
and how it manifests in your body physically. How, like, you want to know about how you want to write a character that's had a lot of big trauma, and you want to know how some of the things that are going to come up for them while they're going through their journey. There you go, right? You want to learn about being more emotionally intelligent. There's a great book called Grow Yourself Up. Talks about emotional maturity, how to show up as your adult self, learn about emotional maturity and how your family of origin comes into play and how you learn about emotions, right? These are books that are written for every person, right? Like we as therapists use them as
Right.
tools, but anybody can pick up those books. And authors, I think, probably have a responsibility to maybe pick up a book that is going to help them understand something and build on that, instead of just feeling like, well, I'm just going to go from my heart and assume that I'm right.
Well,
Yeah,
one of
or a Google search or
Yes.
something
yeah.
like that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's something
Oh,
like the
or the
reason
Google
I
search with just
read.
the AI summary.
Oh yeah, the AI
Oh
summary at the
yeah,
top of the
AI
Google search.
summary.
Oh
I
my
mean, the
gosh,
reason I went and studied Mask of Sanity is because I was writing serial killers and I wanted to understand the
Mhm.
actual mentality and how and why these traits manifest in people. And
Mhm.
what's the most fascinating thing about the book is the variety of people with the
Mhm.
variety of backgrounds that manifest these characteristics, but in each of them in different ways and channels them in different ways. Some of them are CEOs of companies
Mhm.
and run multi-million-dollar corporations. Why? Well, they're freaking obsessed,
Our
right?
Mhm.
And
countries.
they have a singular focus. Well,
See,
yeah, that's not.
I didn't mean to say.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to
Oh,
trigger you. Shh. I'm sorry,
uh,
Troy.
I just saw orange for a minute, then
Shh.
everything went
Let's
clear.
go on
All
to
right.
what type
Anyway,
of
Yeah.
genres are easier
Let's
to write without a trauma.
yeah, or
yeah.
like let's talk about this for a sec. Like I want to know, okay, so if you're going to have a character arc, I'm asking this rhetorically for, well, not rhetorically. I want to know what both of you think. But what does real emotional growth look like then in a book? and what does it look like in real life? Like, how do we make real emotional growth happen in an arc that's not over dramatized, but also will continue to hook the reader into that story and help us feel more like we're being pulled through that story and drawn to that character, and that we don't want to put the book down.
So I have a simple rule for this, and
Okay.
it's not like an ironclad rule, but it's kind of a rule in general about fiction, is to not make things too complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at Story Genius by Lisa Cron, what usually is happening, and if you look at stories that are great, what usually is happening is the character in this particular story, this particular snapshot of their life, this particular series of conflicts and events is dealing with a single misbelief.
There you go.
And then by the end of the book, they have come to some kind of a resolution
Of that
about that misbelief.
misbelief.
That one misbelief. If you give them 6 things to deal with in a book, exactly like you were talking about the
Mhm.
girl that had 6 tropes by chapter 2, or you have multiple characters, because one of the easiest ways to do this, okay, just little secret, okay, is your main character, your protagonist, and your antagonist are dealing with with misbeliefs in the exact same area.
They're
One
mirrors.
of them responds
Mhm.
differently. One of them responds this way. One responds this way. Neither of them are right about this particular topic, but they both have different misbeliefs about that, rooted in whatever triggered that misbelief, which can be, like you say, it can be a major traumatic event. It can be just the way they were raised as a child. It can be so that long term trauma, whatever the case may be, but both of them have come to an erroneous conclusion about this particular theme or topic, the theme being what your book is really about.
Mhm.
And at the end of it, both of them have come to a resolution about that. Now, what can happen is the antagonist still has a misbelief or has a new misbelief, and your protagonist has found out the truth about that particular issue.
There's
Boom, there you have a story.
there's a really good book that you just reminded me of, and it's called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And in
Oh,
this
I
book,
Yes,
remember that book.
she
that is a good book.
has, right, like she has this idea in the beginning of what she wants for her life, and she gets exactly what she thinks she wants, right?
Mhm.
But it's not what she
Mhm,
wants. But the other guy in the story, to try not to ruin the book, he also has a belief, right, that he can entrap her. He can keep her. He'll do the exact thing that she didn't want, right?
Mhm.
But how does it end, right? Like how does, just like you talked about, like as it comes through and she learns about that what she really wanted was connection and love, and she didn't want this path that she set herself on. And
mhm,
by figuring that out, she's able to
And
change the outcome
mhm.
yeah.
that should be set
And
for her, right? But it doesn't come from a traumatic place in the beginning. She just doesn't want to. It happens in the very beginning of the book, but
Mhm.
she doesn't want to marry the old man that she's betrothed to, right? Like she doesn't want to spend her life
right,
in this way that's the culture of the time in the 1500s or
Mhm.
whatever when she
and
started,
that's a
right?
decision,
It's a
Right.
decision.
which
She makes a decision, and that's where her arc starts.
So the thing is about
right.
editors and plot doctors, right, Troy, is what we want to do with you as a writer is we want to make sure we take that idea or that story that you're trying to flesh out, and we want to make sure that you are like taking those triggers that you're creating to make this story happen and the plot to happen. We're going to make sure that the character, that as they're growing, they're going to grow believably, that they're going to understand and like you said, either confirm or disprove that lie that ultimately gives them that resolution at the end of the story. But ultimately, what we want to see is the conflict and the conflict resolved in whatever way that is going to happen, right?
Mhm.
That happens, and sometimes, like, in noir, you don't have a resolution that is a happy ending with a bow
Not
on top.
always. Yeah, not always.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But so I guess my question is when we're writing these kinds of stories, um, how do we make sure? Well, first, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Is trauma is trauma healable, or are these, because some of the things that we've talked about, like these diagnoses and things, if you make that the focus of your book, if you make the trauma the focus or you make the diagnosis the focus of the conflict, and you're trying to create this story where it has this believable resolution. I wonder if that would be unbelievable because some of those things you can't heal. So I'm wondering, is it healable, or is it something that you should just use to help, like, more or less shape the motivations or the decisions of the character and less about making that the focus?
So I just want to preface this with saying this is just the world according to me in a very quick sum up. And that is that we heal from trauma in that we learn to relate to our trauma differently. So we
Okay.
can't go back in time.
Yes.
If you were sexually abused as a child, if you were, had whatever the experience is, you cannot go back and undo that. You
Right.
cannot erase it. But what you can do is learn to relate to it differently. So the triggers that you encounter don't create this trauma response in you, but rather you're able to have emotional maturity. You're able to relate to it in a way that's healthier for you and isn't um, creating more like trauma for you, right? So in that there is healing, because as we learn to relate to it differently, it doesn't have the same impact that it has on us when we are unhealed, when we have not learned how to do that. So as we become healed in that and we learn to relate to it differently, then we learn how to show up differently in our lives. And that's where in this character arc, where we're learning how to show up for ourselves or the other characters in the book that we're trying to have a relationship with or make amends with or do the right thing. That's where that comes from, is that now I've learned, I've had self-awareness, right? Like I understand that something in my behavior is not right. Okay, like that's the first thing we have to first be like, oh, I have some self-awareness. Something is happening because all of my relationships are falling apart, all of this, right? Like something needs to change in me. And then we seek out help in whatever way, therapy or however we do that. And we figure out how we, what do I got to do to change this behavior pattern that I'm stuck in, right? And then when we change the behavior pattern, then okay, now I can look at what's underneath this. Like, what am I dealing with? Oh, I've got this unhealed trauma, or I've got this anxiety, or I've got this thing that I need, right? And then we come out of that on the other end saying, oh, I can show up better because now I've gone through this very simplified process of healing.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's not as simple as that, but
we
yeah,
go
for
through it,
books.
and that's where we come through, and that's where if your author can understand that what we're working on is relating to that trauma differently, it's impacting us in a different way. I just read, or actually I just listened to a book.
Like I said, every
Gosh,
time.
I'm telling you, there's too many. There's too
She's
many.
so
I
many
have to
books.
honestly tell you what it was. But I was just listening to one of the, she did such a great job of what is,
Tell us what
as
it
you're
is.
coming through it. I can't tell you. It's The People We Keep by Alison Larkin.
Okay.
Very good book.
Oh,
Very good book.
yes.
And as she's going through this, like the main character, like she's basically an adult at 16 and has to make some very adult decisions. And as she learns to grow up over the course of the 4 or 5 years that are the story, she's learning about herself and what the impact of her, trauma as a child, of her parents both abandoning her, like what that did to her and how she's showing up. And you can see her healing with every like iteration of, like, she does it a little better and then she has to move on. She does a little better and she does a little better. And through the course of the book, like as a reader, you're looking at this, and no matter what your maybe like lived experience is, you're relating to it because you're like, she's just trying to do it better every time. She's trying to do it better every time. And that's when I got done with that book, I was like, that is just such a beautiful story of showing up for yourself in no matter what the traumatic backstory is, right? Like you're showing up for yourself by the end of it. How do I heal? How do I relate to these things differently so I can become the person I want to be?
And ultimately, that's
Right.
the word, right? Like to heal from that one
Right.
thing that you're trying to work through in that story, right, Troy? So you want to keep it
Right.
simple, but also know how to get through that whole story with that.
Well, and understand, because you solved one misbelief does not mean you have fixed your whole life.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, because that's the other thing that authors oversimplify it,
Yeah.
because they get down to the end of the story and instead of just what I would call a happily for now, which is fine, they
Mhm.
create this kind of false happily ever after where like and like my very first trilogy that was like the thing that really launched my writing career and stuff like that is about a guy who's had like major amounts of childhood wackiness. His mom is a whack job. She thinks he's the new messiah and he was virgin born, and then we find out later like what actually happened. But not until book three do you actually find out what happened, what the history was. But so he has all these misconceived notions about himself, but he's getting out of prison. So it's like mom thinks I'm the messiah and I'm in prison
Yeah.
for doing really bad stuff.
Do you think
You
there's a
know,
difference, Troy, for people who are writing like the approach when somebody's writing just a standalone novel and people who are
in a
trying
series.
a
Mhm.
series? Because when you look at like the Orphan X series, right? Like that's one I love, but like he's in every book, he's able to get a little bit of himself, right? Like
Mhm.
just a little bit of
Hmm.
himself.
And
But
that's exactly,
feels like
yeah.
had to be planned, right? Like you have to kind of know in advance,
Mhm.
like I want this character to go somewhere, and I have to give them room for growth over time. Because like in The People
Mhm.
We Keep, right? Like it's a standalone novel, like she's telling this story and she's able to take us on this journey in just one book, right? But she
Hmm.
could have drawn it out, but it wasn't necessary. Like that's not what the purpose of that book was.
Right. You don't
You
have
look
to
at those
necessarily.
when you look at
Mhm.
those, I mean, Harry Potter, right? Like these books where like there's a growth over time, like you kind of have to have a trajectory. Do you think that you see authors coming into it and they're not prepared to
Yeah.
kind of have that longevity with
Well, I think they're not prepared, and they're too quick to, because what happens is they try to completely heal the person in one book,
Mhm.
right?
And then they want to
And
write a
and
second one.
and what they don't understand is to make that believable. Like I know from my life, like I healed from something and thought, man, I'm good, and then you're like, oh shit, and something else comes along, and you're like, oh man, okay, now I have something else to deal with, right? It's like that's just the nature of things, and I'm in my mid 50s and still figuring things out. Okay, you know, I mean that's fairly normal, you know.
Right. Mhm.
We just don't figure everything out really quick. And so I think that people try to wrap it up with too neat of a bow, even if it's a
Right.
single book. Just you know what I mean, like a prayer for Owen Me. Really, it's his whole life because there's no hope for a sequel. I'm not going to spoil the end, but there's no hope for a sequel, right? But it really at the core of it, he's really dealing with one central issue that is kind of the big issue of his life. But he's really dealing with one central issue, and the end of the book resolves that issue,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Even though it's much more of a complex entire life thing that happens over several years, it's still really the primary focus of the reader is on that one problem. That's a
Something, yeah.
major problem. That's a major
So
issue,
so I
right? So I
teach
think
this.
that's
Yeah, I teach this right in a like epics are built like this, right? You have an overarching plot and then you have multiple subplots in between. And that's kind of how you build a series, is you build a series based on that overarching
yeah.
plot. It has to be an
This one,
overarching theme. What is that?
Breaking Bad.
Yeah,
Breaking Bad
you break
Yeah.
that
is
down.
is a master class. I mean, and I've broken down the whole plot for the entire series. And basically because there is an arc through the whole series. There's a three-act
Mhm.
structure that covers the entire series.
Right.
And
But
you
each
know when the dark
but
moment of the series is.
but
But
each
each season
season
has a three-act
has a
structure,
three-act
and
structure,
each episode has
has
a
a
three-act
three-act.
structure. It's
Exactly.
done exceptionally, exceptionally well. And the reason is Vince Gilligan had a plan,
Hmm.
right? He knew that this was the series and this was the end of it. He just thought nobody would ever put it on TV, you know.
Right.
And things evolved as it went along, but the essential plot stayed the same.
So
The
you have to
essential
have
overall arc stayed the same.
with a series, you have to have an issue or a problem, like Jeannie was mentioning, like you have to come into this prepared that there is an overarching issue that's going to carry that character throughout the entire series of the book
Hmm.
and series of the books, and you can't you can't second guess it. It's really kind of interesting to me the way J.K. Rowling built Harry Potter, because a lot of people, I think they don't think that she thought it all the way through, but she really did. And you don't really know that until you get to the end, right? You're like, oh my gosh, but how much of that do I always want to corner her. One day I want to corner this woman and say, really? Did you really know that from the beginning, or did you just sneak that little tidbit in because it fits so nicely? It doesn't matter though, does it? It doesn't matter, because ultimately it does come on. So if you're going to do a series, just know your plot and your characters well enough that if you decide to go on with it, that you have left that open. And I like what you said, Troy, is that at the end of the story, just happily for now. Just happily for now, we'll do
Hmm.
that for you. Your characters aren't going to be, like you said, completely, they're just going to rethink the way they're approaching that trauma, or reframe that trigger in such a way that they can react better or differently. And if you're going to have a story with all of us, like you said, Troy, we're all just 55-year-olds or 60-year-olds or 80-year-olds just trying to get the next day figured out. When we're doing that, we're all just a little happily for now when we go to bed that night.
Hmm.
Sometimes we're not.
Well, and that's
But
like,
sometimes
I
we
mean,
are.
the thing is, I mean, the analogy that, well, it's not even an analogy, is just because you heal doesn't mean there's not a scar
Right. Right.
and there's
Yeah.
not a reminder, right? That's not what it means. Healing isn't about this sudden transformation into someone completely different. You will still be you. Wherever you go, there you are. As they always say, if there's an asshole in every room, and if you don't know who it is, it might be you. You
And
know, I
what
mean,
you
it's
said,
just.
Troy, just to sort of like wrap it on that, like they're the trauma, like, right? We have a wound, right? We talked
Right.
about that. We've got this
Hmm.
wound. And before it's healed, if you just imagine, right? Like there's just a scab, right? And a
Right.
scab makes us think that we're healed, but we're not.
We're
Because what
not.
happens with that scab, it's
Hmm.
not prematurely, right? But when you
Yeah.
come through it and you relate to the trauma differently and you come through it, a more healed version of you on the other end, of course there's a scar,
Of
right?
course there's a
That
scar.
Yeah.
scar has somehow shaped the person that we become, right? So when we, no matter what our lived experience is, it's shaping who we are. And I don't think that very many people would look back on their lives that have had really difficult, traumatic things happen and say, oh, I'm so grateful that that happened. But what we can say is, I'm grateful for who I've become. I'm grateful for the person that I've
Hmm.
been to evolve into, to grow and change into, and to see where I've been and what I've come through and how it's shaped me into who I am now. And do I like this person or not, right? And what do I need to change if I'm not loving that person? Okay, I still have more healing to do in that thing, right?
Right.
Maybe
Hmm.
that's where my second book
And that's
comes
where your
in,
second book
right?
comes in. Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's
Hmm.
perfect. So, so I guess some of the key takeaways, and we did hit a lot of these, so I'm really proud of this. And I'm proud of us. We're a good team. Not all of us are born in pain. Not all of us have these big traumatic, like you said, events that happen in our lives. We're not all gonna accidentally kill our whole platoon and have to try to save the world. Some of us are just, we woke up that day and we realized our marriage sucks, you know? So what do you do? Right? It's a totally different mindset and an approach to the story writing process, right? So, but you don't have to use that clinical language. You don't have to point fingers and create a villain out of something that maybe it doesn't exist. And like you said, sometimes that overuse of those things can cause, it will cause your readers, more readers will close the book and put it down than they will keep it open and say, well, let me get through this hard part here and see where she goes with this. It's we
Hmm.
don't have time for that. Our mind our minds, we have really short attention spans nowadays. We're all very busy. Everybody's busy, right?
Mhm.
And so those of us that do read for a living and those of us that read for pleasure, we're very picky about what we put time into.
Well, and I'll say this, Troy, I don't read the backs of books. I don't read the
She
summary of a book.
doesn't.
No, 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 no. I am a book by the cover and the like sort of like other people's reviews, like how many stars, kind of what other people have thought, sort of. But I'll go off of my gut on a book. And I've been so surprised sometimes with books that I've read that are just amazing. And I've been surprised with books that I know are like all the rage, but I don't know anything about them. And I'll pick it up and go, who's reading this? Who is reading this and thinking that this is well written? I will not say it, but there was a very popular book just recently that was in Costco. And my daughter picked it up to a random page, my daughter, the reader, and she just started reading out loud. And we were like, what's happening with this writing? Like, it's so awful, but for some reason, everybody's reading it. So I guess there's an audience for everybody. But I think that my approach of going in blind has led me to some really good books,
really good
some really
books.
good characters, some really good stories that I may not have read before, but also it means that the author has to do a really good job for me to like help me learn about the story, because I go into it blind. I know nothing.
Yeah. And and I don't think you're rare. I don't think
I'm a little picky, but that one, so if I do not finish a book, that's a pretty bad book for me.
It's pretty bad book.
I don't have a very big like
yeah.
Like I usually will get all the way to the end because I hope that the author's going to just give me something. I'm like,
yeah,
keep going.
Yeah. Just save it. Did they save it somewhere?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want my,
for sure.
Tell me a good story.
Tell me a good story.
Just tell me a good story.
And I love Jeannie's recommendations too, because if she's telling me it's a good book, I know it's a good book. I know it's a good book. There's been a couple of good books where she's told me like, Stacey, you need to read this. And I will be like, I don't have time for this, because I don't have a lot of time to read personally. But when she tells me it's a really good book, I've never been disappointed. But it's funny because we'll talk about it and we'll have totally different takes on it. But
totally different. Like we like them for different reasons.
Totally different reasons. But so emotional depth. I have another point here. Emotional depth can come from reflection, change, and connection, not just the catastrophe. So don't catastrophize everything. It's not worth it. Also, it feels disingenuous. If you try to make it this big thing. I think a lot of times one of the biggest things that Gen Zs and Gen Alphas are very big on is authenticity, right? Like they can see through the bullshit really, really easy. And authors that write these big like catastrophes or they make a mountain out of a molehill. I think that a lot of times, especially the younger generation, they're gonna see right through it, and they're gonna find it disingenuous and inauthentic, and they're gonna put the book down. And putting a book down, guys, that's death. If they put a book down and they found a good spot to put it down, this is what I always say about pacing too. If you've got a slow part and that's the part where they can close the book and go pee, you got a problem, because you don't know when they're going to pick that book back up.
This is my problem with Audible. I sit in my driveway for like a half hour when I get home, because I'm like, I can't turn it off.
That's a good book.
Gotta get my AirPod in.
Go into the house. That's a good book.
Anyway,
and then you've recommended some really great books, so I hope Sydney in the editing of this, she can pop up those covers, because I would really like are there any other books that we should recommend between the three of us that we feel like that would probably help authors kind of like find
the one that's
find some space here?
It's related, but it's super helpful. It's called the Emotion Thesaurus. There's a whole series of them.
Have it right here.
And the reason those are really helpful is it shows you how to show the reader emotion in your character without telling them, Susie feels sad. Feeling sad looks different to 50 to different people, right? So those are really good books for because again, this is about showing the emotion of your character as a result of the actions. And you may know the diagnosis behind it, you may know the trauma behind it, but your reader doesn't have to know all that. And that's really the important part of it. Show us, don't tell us about it, don't share your research, but please do your research.
Please do it. We're gonna be able to tell if you do it or not. Oh gosh, there's a book I'm editing right now. It's epic fantasy, and I know how you feel about epic fantasy, but I was like going into it. I will admit, I mean, if you're listening to this, please, sweetie, I need you to understand. I say this with love. I was gonna go into this read like I was kind of nervous about it because I'd just come off of Bob and Todd's fantasy, right? And it's going to be hard to outdo that one, right? 27 years of research and writing. And I was worried, but I am so impressed with the way she shows doesn't tell. She shows some really interesting, quirky things about her character. She has some ticks that this character does that she doesn't make it obvious, and just you can tell that there are some issues here in her heart, and she hasn't put a button on it, and it just comes out in her behavior. And I love the way she does that. She's doing a really good job building tension and everything, just from those things, like you said, Troy. The way she comes into a room, the way she approaches a situation, the way she approaches a conflict or or a conflict that comes up, it's really, really good. So be careful that you understand that, and that you're not just like you said, this is very much a label thing, right? You're not just saying she was sad, she was mad. It's, how did she react? She clenched the fist, moved abruptly out of the room. Be careful with your verbs. Choose good verbs, guys. Use good verbs.
Oh yeah, that's another good one. That's called. Oh, let's see here. I got two of them right here. Activate
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and verbalize.
Yep.
Yeah, both excellent references. You can see post-it notes, all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah,
anyway,
we love our
yeah.
books, right? Anyway, do you have any other books that you would want people to kind of like tap into? You said there's too many.
It's too many. At my house, I think officially could be a library.
It totally could.
We need to count our books. I think I have at last count like 427 books on Audible. So I don't know.
You don't know.
It's a big library. I think there's so many good books. I think as far as this goes, like I would definitely say if you're writing a book, you want to know more about trauma or emotions, Body Keeps the Score or Growing Yourself Up are both great resources for that. And if you just want a good book, find me on Goodreads.
Find me on Goodreads. Yeah. And
there
then
you go.
Again, I'm gonna reiterate Story Genius by Lisa Cron. That'll really be great. Another one that's a little less well known, Susan May Warren wrote a book called what did she call it? The Story Equation. And it's really good
Oh
about
yeah, that's
helping
very good.
it's really a short read. You could read it within an hour, but that's actually a really good one about like finding that lie and exploiting it and learning where and how to make that growth happen with that story arc. So those are really great books. I really like the idea of this. Maybe I'll do this with you, Troy, or something, but maybe we should create the red flag checklist for diagnosed dumping. Like we should just make sure that like create a checklist.
Yeah, we should create that and we should create a list of author resources about different trauma.
Yeah.
And just basically say, hey, if you really want to research this is where you need to research it. These are reliable, reputable sources, but that are written for the layman. Mask of Sanity, I would say is on that borderline. It's almost academic.
Yeah.
But
So maybe what
if
we'll
you
do is
really want to know,
yeah.
But anyway,
maybe by
there
the
are
time we
probably
put this
easier
out.
ways.
Well, by the time we put this out, maybe I'll have that all ready for us, and we can so look in the description if I put this out at the time of publishing, but we'll definitely put it in here or you can find it on Mize and Troy's website. We'll just do that.
Yep.
Anyway, so any final advice for our authors, everybody?
I'm just going to say we need to have the discussion about the woo-woo side of writing.
Yeah, we were going to do that.
As far as like channeling it feeling like sometimes you're channeling the story and channeling characters. Because what you're talking about with series and stuff like that, about having an idea, like I had an idea for the end of my first series because it ends. It's at the end of it, the trilogy ends. There is more story that could be told, but it ends.
That means somebody died.
No, in this case, that does not what it means. Anyway, because there's an open door there. There could have been something else. And besides, tons of people die in my books. George R.R. Martin, that guy's an amateur. Anyway, but I mean, when you talk about a series having, like, I had a vague idea of how that series was going to end. That's not exactly how that series ended, because you do feel it as you go as an author. And so, J.K. Rowling, I've seen her notes. on the books. Her plot outlines, they're amazing.
Have you read Robert Galbraith, her Robert Galbraith books, Cormoran Strike? Like, have you read those?
Have you
Yes.
read those?
They're
Yes.
so
I haven't read them
and
yet.
her like taking on
Oh,
it is remarkable. And I was actually just thinking about that when you were talking a little bit ago about her ability to bring in different characters with different life experiences, right? Like she's got like there's trauma all around, except that the book isn't about the trauma. The book is about these beautiful characters she's created and this world that she's created for them in this detective agency, right? And like solving these crimes, but through it, she just has such, she's J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
She just weaves so beautifully like their healing process and their growth into these just crazy stories and murders that she's solving that are
I'm gonna have to read them.
a couple of those I have had to put on the lamp for a minute because they're a little dark, they're a little graphic, and I'm trying to go to sleep. That's where things go. They go on the lamp. Yeah. I got to get set over here for a second so that I can bring lighter thoughts to my brain, but then I pick it right back up. But yeah.
So because I don't have any issue with that reading dark stuff late, and I always tell you that the authors that write dark stuff, are the best people to hang out with at the bar. We get all our darkness out in the books, and then we're fun people.
You're fun
because we already got rid of all the baggage and garbage in our books. Now we're like, anyway,
that's awesome. Well,
but
okay.
Yeah.
Final recap. Do you have a final?
No, final thing is just we'll talk on another episode about the woo-woo side of writing and the fact of like there are some things where you need to trust your gut. There's research and then there's creativity.
Well,
you have to balance those two out.
We'll do the woo-woo on the next episode then. So join us next week for the woo-woo. The woo-woo of woo-woo writing.
Woo-woo side of writing. The woo-woo.
So anyway, well, everyone, I hope you got a lot out of this. And if you have any questions, you can always hit us up. Troy Lambert. No, it's not Troy Lambert Writes. It's theplot-abides.com.
Theplot-abides.com.
And printtopro.com. I've officially changed it, but you can still find me at Edits by Stacy if you still like that. And then we're happy to help you guys answer your questions. If you have any like suggestions on topics you want us to hit us up in the comments. And we're on podcast platforms everywhere, so you can listen to us on the go. So if you want to go on to your favorite podcast platform and listen to Troy and I just ramble on about stupid stuff, come on over and join us. Troy's going to definitely rant. He'll definitely rant. I will just try to laugh and get him back on topic. All right. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Make your mark.
Yep. We'll see you next week.
Bye.